that if I failed, I was a failure. And to ask questions made me a weak guy, not even a weak man, but just a weak guy, because men didn't ask questions. We have all the answers. And that was the biggest bunch of garbage that ever existed, because once I started asking questions, I began to sort things out and find my health and discover who I was and had been playing small and passive and letting fear rule my life. Which one of us, as a man, as a husband, as a father, doesn't want to pass along a better legacy to our own children or our grandchildren than we received? I just took that stand. It was hard. I've done the work. I'm doing the work. And that's where I encourage other men. Hey, it's either you take a stand and break that, or you're going to pass that legacy on. And that's not something any of us want.
Welcome, everyone, to the Revolutionary Man podcast. I'm the founder of The Awakened Man and your host, Alan DeMonso. Are you done being captive to doubt and despair? And does your family walk on eggshells wondering if you're going to lose control yet again? Listen, many of us have some form of generational dysfunction that gets us into us in our young lives. And then we start repeating those patterns as we get a little bit older. But today, what you need to know is that you're not alone in this struggle, and it doesn't have to be like that any longer for you in your life. So I want you to sit back and get ready as we unpack our past and transform our lives for the better. Before we get into all that, I just want to remind you to hit like, subscribe, and share on your favorite platform so we can stay up to date on the latest content that we provide here, and as well to help me grow the Awakened Man message. And for that, I am truly grateful. So now let's get on with today's episode.
The average man today is sleepwalking through life, many never reaching their true potential, let alone ever crossing the finish line to living a purposeful life. Yet, the hunger still exists, albeit buried amidst his cluttered mind, misguided beliefs, and values that no longer serve him. It's time to align yourself for greatness. It's time to become a revolutionary man. Stay strong, my brother.
As customary, I like to start out by asking a couple of questions to set the stage for our talk. So do you ever wonder when it's going to turn around for your experience so you can have happiness and joy again? And are there generational issues that are still lingering in your life and you just want to overcome them once and for all? So listen, if either of these questions are bringing up some strong emotions for you, then that's great, because today my guest is going to share his journey and how he is equipping men through healing to change their own lives and those of their families. So allow me at this time to introduce my guest. Mike Forrester is a men's transformation coach, the founder of the Living Fearless coaching programs, and the host of the Living Fearless Today podcast. Through his personal journey with overcoming failures, setbacks, and struggles, Mike fuels his clients to overcome their own self-doubts and generational dysfunction. Mike's been featured on various podcasts, including Hanging On to Hope, Extreme Health, Own Your Own Life, Your Career, and Think Unbroken. Welcome to the show, Mike. How are things?
Oh, they're going great, Alan. I appreciate you inviting me to join you and look forward to our conversation, my friend.
Yeah, me too. As I was getting ready for today, I just thought, what a great story. And that's how I like to start off the podcast is, Mike, in my work, we always talk to men about doing and being on their own hero's quest. So tell us a little bit about your hero's quest, especially the biggest obstacles that you've had to face in your life and how that paved the road to who you are today.
Sure thing. And I'm sure that it'll surprise you that I was my own biggest challenge that I faced. So I came from childhood trauma, mental, emotional, and even physical abuse. And so with that, my parents told me stuff like, we weren't planning for you, you were a mistake, you're, just pretty much boiled down to, and what I believed was I wasn't wanted. And unbeknownst to me was that I was struggling with dyslexia. So it wasn't until 40 that I discovered, hey, I have dyslexia. So it made a lot of sense on why I felt special, and not in the best way of feeling special. But, those kind of beliefs just became really embedded in who I was and how I showed up. And, if you've ever seen the Hulk, or who Eeyore is, man, I was just those two combined. And so I could flip flop between feeling pity and just downtrodden. And then when I got triggered, I was often to the races, just seeing red. And that was, the kind of like the polar opposite sides of things. And as a protective measure, and this may seem kind of different, but there was a lot of humor that was focused on putting myself down. And I say it was a protective measure because that took the power away from you, Alan, or the other people that I was hanging around with, and put it in my hands. And so that self-deprecating talk, that speech, just reinforced, unbeknownst to me, because I didn't get it, just reinforced everything that my parents had said or that I felt, from classmates or teachers, about who I was and how I was showing up in life. Fast forward to, meeting my wife, discovered what love was through her and how she treated me. And there is nobody that wants to realize that what their parents have done. And, my parents loved me in the best way they could, but because they were hurt, their love wasn't true, if that makes sense, no fault of theirs. And at that point, it was kind of this conundrum. I was at a crossroads. Do I continue with this young gal who I really, really like, but she's put me at a point of now questioning my past. So obviously I kept going. She was amazing and super attractive, and I was just head over heels. But it put me in a place of having to work through my own stuff, Alan. And I chose not to for many years. And so that then carried over into a marriage where I almost ended up divorced just because of I was a victim. At least I took on that mindset. And so if I could get her to leave, then I could continue that belief and that thought process. And unfortunately, that was also then imparted to my children, and I had 4 at that time. So it was getting past that belief that if I failed, I was a failure. And to ask questions made me a weak guy, not even a weak man, but just a weak guy, because men didn't ask questions. We have all the answers. And that was the biggest bunch of garbage that ever existed, because once I started asking questions, I began to sort things out and find my health and discover who I was and had been playing small and passive and letting fear rule my life. And so once I started on that journey, I began to get out of my own way and then experience everything to now where it's like life is completely different. Do I still struggle with, fear, anxiety, and depression? Yeah, that stuff comes up, but it doesn't take me anywhere near as long to get past it, to overcome it, to step into it, right? Yeah. So there's freedom in the journey. There's benefit, because which one of us, as a man, as a husband, as a father, doesn't want to pass along a better legacy to our own children or our grandchildren than we received? And so I just took that stand. It was hard. I've done the work. I'm doing the work. And that's where I encourage other men. Hey, it's either you take a stand and break that, or you're going to pass that legacy on. And that's not something any of us want.
Yeah, that is so true, Mike. Wow, that's incredible. And I'm thinking, listening to you tell your story, and I think about that self-deprecating humor that we use, and that was and still is a bit my my mechanism for coping. When we're involved in a stressful situation, and it took a while to understand, like you're talking about how that really keeps us in victim mode, and it keeps us from really growing as men and really diving into that shadow aspect of the part that we're just not willing to deal with. And I like how you've already brought that to the table, because it's so many of us guys, right? We're supposed to have all the answers and we don't. And are we ready to admit that? And are we ready to take that journey, that step into deciding and figuring out who we are? So I want to commend you on that.
Thank you. I appreciate it, my friend.
Yeah. So tell me, how does childhood trauma influence our personal and our professional decision-making processes?
Well, I'm glad you connected the two there. because for me, that was just an absolute discovery. I thought it was, hey, I just need to straighten up how work goes, or I just need to straighten up how my family life is going. And if people would just fall in line, everything would be great. No, no, no. The problem, and I began to find this out through my business coaching, was that it's like, hey, I have a problem over here. Huh. I have that same issue over here. Huh. Maybe they're both stemming from me. And they absolutely were. But here's the amazing thing. We can address it in one place. If we take the time, really look at what's going on, dig into it, address it, that shows up both in our work and personal life differently at that point. And so there's no getting away from ourselves. There's no getting away from our own problems. And that childhood trauma, like I shared earlier, those messages that I received from my parents, they said it because they were hurt, right? I don't want to demonize or make monsters out of my parents. They did the best that they could, just like I did the best that I could at the time with my marriage and my children.
Yeah.
I didn't know any better. I wasn't willing, let's put it that way, to step into that position to address what was going on. I didn't know there was another opportunity. But that childhood trauma then creates a belief system that we operate from. And so if I believe, hey, I'm not able to do X, right? For me, because of the learning challenges and what I was coming from, I believed I couldn't write. So I would never step in and try that. So I'll never be this kind of man. I'll never be this kind of husband. We're putting limitations on what we can step in and do. And unless we actually step out there and try it, we don't know. Here's the sad thing. Our children will watch and see what we do and don't do. And they're going to learn those patterns from us. And so I was setting this kind of whole behavior that my children wouldn't try to do stuff because they learned that, hey, dad's playing it safe. He's playing it small. He gets mad when I don't do it right. Then I'm not going to go do stuff. And so they capped themselves out and limited themselves. And so that childhood trauma will create like a box. You know, we've seen the mimes, how they kind of put up their hands and live within an imaginary box.
Yeah.
We're doing the same thing from our mindset and our heart, how we feel about things. Our actions then carry that out. And we teach that, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, we're teaching that to our children. And they're going to continue that on, you know, as they go forward. And that's not what any of us want. So, you know, it's, again, step into the role and do the work, because we all want the best for ourselves, but also for our children and grandchildren. So
yeah, 100%, brother, 100%. And I like how you're emphasizing, and I completely agree with you, that we're not, you know, these discussions, these talks that we have with men, it's not about demonizing, you know, our parents, right? And or ourselves, our younger version of ourselves, because all of us are doing the best that we can at the time with the knowledge and the skills and everything that we had available for us. And so I think it's really important for people to pick that up, that we're not, while we recognize where the genesis of some of this has happened, it's not about making them be the bad guy or yourself the bad guy. The other thing I like that you talked about was you talked about discounting who we are, who and what we are as men. And I think back to my life and how many times have I done that, right? And I think anybody can say, yeah, I've discounted it. I'm not going to, why would I take on this new task or this new skill? I can't do that. I can't do this. Well, I think it's so important that we not do that to ourselves. And it comes back to some of the self-talk. So I want to get into a little bit about how that has manifested and maybe how is that bit part of what these cycles are, you know, when you talk about, you know, unhealthy patterns as generational legacies. Are those things that you learned from your parents, or is that other things that you were learning from your parents?
So in looking at how my parents told me, hey, you'll never amount, you're a mistake.
Yeah.
That then sets a belief that I'm not good enough. So, and if you and I are both at the same place, right? There's an opening for a position, you know, let's go for management. I look at you and I automatically elevate you to be the man for that position. And I put myself down for not being qualified. If they see me and I get that, if for some reason I beat Alan, people are going to see me for the fraud that I am. Those kind of thoughts were what went through my head. And so I didn't need anybody else to hold my career back. I did it 100% on my own because I was just afraid of being seen as that failure that I was always concerned of being found out as, I'm not enough. And if they find out, I'm going to lose my job. The world's going to come crashing down around me. So that kind of limiting mindset, that belief will impact your behavior, what you do, what you try for. I wouldn't step out because I was afraid. And so anything that went on was always driven by fear, playing it safe and almost hedging my bets to continue being where I was at. I didn't need an anchor. I was fabricating one in my own imagination. So
yeah, no kidding, for sure, right? It's almost like the imposter syndrome, right? We're just doing that to ourselves and just discounting it and continually doing that in lots of different ways. And it doesn't have to be big things either in our life. It can be just small little things. Like, my earlier on my career, I was a chef. And so a lot of people, my wife and I, we have a hard time getting invites to go to dinner because nobody wants to have me in the house. It's like, well, I enjoy a good meal too, It just, I don't have to be behind the stove. Maybe I could just sit in the dining room and have a glass of wine. But you know what I mean? It's just people right away discount it. And it's unfortunate how that happens in life, that we start to do that to ourselves, and how it limits us. It really limits our growth as individuals, and especially as men. So what was the catalyst that finally caused you to wake up and stop hurting your family emotionally?
So in looking around me, I had finally gotten into a position where I was making a better salary. I'd gotten into corporate America. And so I'm seeing people that are at a level that I want to be at. And the thing was, I was older than they were. So I'm like, all right, if they're younger than me and they're already there, what's going on? And of course, from my victim mindset, I'm looking like the world's against me. I'll never get ahead. Just things are trying to keep me back. Well, that couldn't be further from the truth. But then the problem was, okay, if you're in charge, why are you here? Like, what's keeping you here? Why aren't you where they are? And so I started to ask questions, which in and of itself was a challenge. Because if you remember, I said, like, being failing makes you a failure. And if you're asking questions, it keeps you from being a man. Well, I already didn't feel like one, so I didn't have much to lose. So I started asking questions and finding out there's a different way to live life. Imagine that. And so from that, I started just asking, different guys, hey, what are you doing about this? And finding out, yeah, they struggle as well, because oftentimes we almost think like everybody else has that Pinterest life. It's just us that's struggling in our marriage, with our children, with our work. It's not. There's nothing further from the truth. We all struggle. But the problem is when we don't communicate, we create that illusion. We believe that lie. And so when we as men are in community and we find, friendships that we can actually trust and go, hey, where are you at? Rather than going, hey, let's talk about sports and keep things on a superficial level. When we go into the fact of what life's about, when you find those men that are trustworthy, you discover it's not just me. And you get a place as a sounding board, because often we're blind to the solutions that are available to us and we feel railroaded. So it was seeing that there was a different opportunity available that I hadn't been seeing, I wasn't aware of. And so from there, it was just deciding to take the chance. And, okay, if I take the action, is it life ending? and it's not. We might think it is, but what's the likelihood of it? And it's usually not high. And so that was the reason things started to change. And the kind of the struggle that my wife and children went through was, I grew up with manipulation as part of, like my mom's, behaviors. And so I had already gone through in manipulating my family to kind of ease stuff off. And so as I started to change and talk about change, that was one thing that I had to fight against. But if I didn't make that first decision, there was no way forward in a healthy way. So
Yeah, for sure. I think back to, on how many of us are probably raised. I know for us, the household was filled with lots of guilt and shame, and that was the control mechanisms to keep us in line. And I think that also was a generational legacy that was passed on by generations and generations of my family, anyways. And I think it's so crucial that you were able to recognize that and make that pivot and that change. And I also like how you talk about that, that Pinterest life. It's that social media and what we see on Instagram or Facebook and all that. It's 2%, if anything, of somebody's true nature and character of who they are. And yet we think that's who we need to be like. And so it takes a little bit of navel gazing, that's for sure. And to ask those tough questions. Now, listen, you also talk a little bit about silent suffering, and I'd like to get you to expand a little bit on what you mean by that, and what, and if you have an antidote for it.
So silent suffering is the fact that we as guys, like, you and I were just talking about, is we don't bring things up. Does it mean that guys don't have emotions? Absolutely not. If you look at the statistics, the women are a higher percentage of depression. So, you could look at it and say, well, guys don't get depressed. That's not true, because if you look at the suicide numbers, we're 3 to 4 times higher. So instead of talking about it, we're going in and making that ultimate decision of, I just don't see any hope. Yeah. And that's unfortunate, because, there is hope. It takes some time. It takes effort. It's not that quick fix, it's not a microwave option. And so the stuff is there. We just, again, think we're the only ones. We're isolated. And of course, that just gets a stronger and stronger base. And so the silent suffering is the fact that we're isolated. We don't believe that anybody else is going to understand us. And, we just continue to be left with our own thoughts. And there are men that, I've coached that, you'll see posts, different things around, you'll talk to them, that they try and share, they'll be like, I want to have this kind of conversation with my wife. It's not always the best place to go if you're in a tough position. Yeah. If your wife is hurt, she may not react in a healthy manner. Okay. Just like if your wife, entrusted, you in an unhealthy position, same thing. Results may not be the same way you'd like. So my suggestion is to get out of that silent suffering. If that's the place that you're in right now, or you feel yourself going into, is to look around. Who are the men that you trust, that you can say, yeah, I think that, Alan or Bob or Steve, different people around you would be trustworthy, that they're on a trajectory to a life that you want. You're looking for someone that's forward moving, that's, as much as they say, it's like, look for like-minded people. When you're in that hurt place, you don't want like-minded people, because that's misery loves company kind of people, and that's not what you need. But you want people that are just down the road from you, that are further along in their journey, that, they can empathize with you and yet be open with you. And start with smaller stuff. Don't just barf on them and, put everything out there, but start with some stuff. test the water and start working the way out, because it's going to be an exercise and a test for you as much as it is for the person that you're giving, that you're sharing with and giving the information to see if they're trustworthy, because it's not normal. If we're in silence, then speaking out is going to be a challenge in and of itself.
Yeah, for sure. And that's so true. And I like how you brought up a couple points there. The first one about, wanting to have that conversation with our wives, and she may not be equipped just then at that time, or equipped at all on how to have that conversation. And I know in some of the discussions I have with some of the men that I coach and their relationship stuff, that's exactly what's happening. Neither one of them knows how to communicate well. They know how to do it the wrong way, or the way that's been causing their marriage so much trouble. And so they struggle with trying to have that conversation and get it back into a place that's productive. And so that leads to that second point you made, is about going out and finding that person that guy that's a little bit further down the path, and not throwing up all over them. Because as we've been talking about, throughout this whole interview today, is the guys aren't used to talking. And so if we just vomit on top of someone, then the challenge is they're not used to hearing that. They just need it in a small dose. It's just a little dose at a time. And it's so true, because we're so fearful that we protect ourselves, right? We want to do it right. We want to be right. And then when we come from that perspective, then it's difficult when we try to step out and really take care of ourselves. So let's talk a little bit about your men's coach and why you launched men's coaching, as well as the Fearless Living Today podcast.
So the reason I started out with the coaching is, like I shared, I was a mess. I was going down the wrong path with nitrous oxide, man. It was not an easy place to be, either for myself, my wife, or my children, because I wanted to maintain that image. And so I'm telling them, don't you dare tell anybody what's really going on behind the scenes at home, keeping up appearances. Well, as I went along, like I said, it took a while. I had a lot to go through, and it takes time. It's not just me that's healing, because, my family's been in it, so they're changing as well. But as they're seeing that, yeah, hey, dad is really working at this and things are sticking, the whole family dynamic changed. I mean, Al and I went from where I thought I would be divorced and in an apartment playing video games and, eating fast food, to where my wife wants to be with me. She's having conversations, we're hanging out, we're watching sci-fi movies, so, for me, that was the real test. But my children wanted to hang out. And so we started going out on date nights. And that was where I was like, all right, if I can experience this, I know that other men can. And, my children, they're all adults now. And I'm happy to say that there's strong relationships with them. And two of them have a son each. So I have 2 grandsons.
Nice.
Dude, I cannot imagine continuing on the path I was to pass along that pattern, that unhealthiness. And so taking a look at who you want to be and the legacy you want to leave, is really, I wanted to pass along that gift, to be able to help men see, hey, who can I be, not who I've been told I am. Yeah. Because it doesn't always mesh up. Most of the time, it honestly doesn't. And so when you see you as who you can be, as who you are, who you're capable of being, it not only heals you and gives you space, but it gives your wife space. And, there's not that insecurity that keeps her capped as well. Yeah. The children, they're also now learning, hey, it's okay to take a chance and fail. So he gives them a greater space. And we have the ability to break those chains, to leave a different legacy. And that's exactly what I wanted to do, because I looked at it and said, if I can do this, and this is the experience that I get to have, absolutely want other men to have this. And so with the Living Fearless Today podcast, that was where I invite other men just like you do to come on, share where they are, what they've gone through, and how they've done it. Because if I'm not at the point where I'm willing to say, hey, I need help, I can at least listen and get tips, just like, you're providing here and giving me those bite-sized nuggets. I can take those and apply them to my life today, because then I can take action, test the waters, and step out into that healthier, being of me, without remaining where I'm stuck at right now. So that was why the coaching came about. That's why the podcast came about. And it's realizing we're not alone, and there's another better, happier option out there that is living fully alive.
100%, brother, 100%. And that's so awesome, that you recognize that, and now you're doing that work to help get other men to where they need to be, so they can take responsibility for their lives. And so I wanted to ask you, so along this journey, and I noticed the background, you're obviously a big reader, and that's outstanding. And so did you have mentors? Like, were there physical mentors that you worked with? Were there maybe some of the books that you would lean into, and authors? Like, how did you do that transformation work? How did that come about?
That was a whole lot of different information that I pulled from, man, because I got fed up. Once I began to see that there was a different option, I didn't want to stay on the path I was on, Alan. Yeah. I mean, why do you want to keep hitting your hand with a hammer when you realize that hitting the nail has a better result? And so I listened to podcasts, I read books. Reading books is a decision, because like I said, I have dyslexia. So it's a decision, and I'll listen to the book as I read the book. But it also involved men that came alongside of me, mentors, coaches. If I could delve into stuff, I did. Now, I'll give you the behind the scenes on this stuff, the transparency. Yeah. There were times where it was like, I don't want to go do this aspect of it, because I was afraid with the trauma, you have a tendency to forget stuff because you're protecting, you're kind of like compartmentalizing things, right? Almost like boxing it up and putting it in the dark corner of the closet. There were times where I was going to, coaching, and I was scared, because if I started talking about stuff, I was thinking that I was opening an emotional Pandora's box, and I didn't know what I was going to remember, what I was going to recall experiencing. And there was physical abuse that went on, and I didn't know what else was beyond that. So, it's that community, those friends can be the ones that give you the realistic perspective, that encourage you along the way. If it's not a great step, then hey, there's people to call you out and go, have you thought about this? If it's a one where you're looking at the negative aspect of it in an unrealistic, level, then they can go, is this really how things will turn out? What's the likelihood of it? And can walk along with you. It's almost like, being coached to walk a high wire. If I've not done that more than 3 feet above the ground, you put me 30 feet up, I may not notice the fact that you have wires on me to keep me from falling. So it's one that I took multiple paths, and not everything worked for me. And just like you, there's different things you test out, they work differently, and you pursue the ones that are giving you the results. So
yeah, absolutely. I think that's so key there. That I picked up from it is that you just didn't try one thing, right? You tried something, and if it worked, then you stuck with it. You tried something else, but you were always exploring. And I think, that's why I like the idea of us being on, Campbell's Hero's Quest or Hero's Journey. And we're always, striving to get that to that point where we're whole and complete, even though we always are, but we don't always feel that way as men, right? We feel that there's something missing. And so was that some of the strategy you used to help stave off depression and anxiety, or did you use some other things as well?
Well, in the beginning, it was just like came at me. I mean, it was almost like a like a fire hose. And there was just so much that I was trying to combat. And what I really found success with was trying to tackle one thing at a time. And so while I was working to heal myself mentally and emotionally, my physical, I wasn't focused on it. I just didn't have the bandwidth. And so now that I've gotten that under control, that's something else I'm working is to reclaim my health, because in my unhealthy mindset, in that state, I didn't make healthy decisions physically either. Go figure. So it has been one of those that I actually operate within a routine. So in my morning, I get up, I do certain things, and I know those are going to occur. They put me in a certain mental state, an energy state. I drink water. I'm in a red light sauna. Now that's not something everybody does. It may not work for anybody else, but it works for me. I go to the gym because it's like I function best when I have physical exertion. I have friends that go at night. That does not work because then I'm up all night. So, but it's also a matter of preparing and going, I need this amount of sleep, and making sure that, whether I've gotten everything done that I want to get done, I'm preparing for the next day and making sure that I'm taking care of my health. So there's preventative stuff I do along the way, but I'm also looking to my friends, those folks that are my coaches one step ahead of me, that are going, hey, why aren't you looking at using this tool? Or what about this? Go read this book. Having multiple eyes that are going down the road that are looking for growth helps me to grow that much faster, because I'm not having to reinvent the wheel. Does it always end up being stuff that's beneficial? No, but I'll take my odds, when it's like, Alan, what are you doing that's helping you? And then I can decide, does that fit for me?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Because it's all about the exploration, right? And figuring out what's working, what's not working. And then, and I really like how you talked about how you've been saying this through the whole talk today, about how one aspect of your life affects so many more, right? And so if we have a poor mindset, or a fixed mindset, as I like to call it, then it tends to seep in. It's very insidious, right, into the rest part of our lives. And the next thing you know, we're sitting on the couch and we'd rather have Doritos as opposed to, maybe be on the treadmill to watch TV, or do go and be more physical. So it's so interesting, I think, just how when you stop to think about, and that's the thing with guys, if they're really listening to this, we're not talking about, this isn't rocket science here. We're not talking about doing like major shifts here. It's about understanding the triggers, those silent triggers that are happening, and how, it's chick, whiz, boom. Oh, look at, there's Al sitting on the couch. Well, what happened in those triggers that allowed that to transpire? And I think that's why it's so important that, you're doing this kind of men's work to help people out. But here's a little different question I have for you. So what led you to discover why you needed to have a stocked fridge, a freezer, and a pantry?
So we're going to go back a ways on this one. So you'll recall that I talked about manipulation being something that I grew up with.
Yeah.
So that's an aspect of control. My mother was the dominant personality in our house. And so in order to control the environment, because, she wasn't working because of her depression, my dad was the only income that they had. And in order to keep enough food, she would lock the fridge. Alan, I didn't ever think about the fact that I wanted a stocked pantry, a stocked fridge, a stocked freezer. I didn't ever equate it to anything in my past. I didn't question it. So one of the things with healing is that as we heal, things that we've been blind to in our past that are guiding our actions will be uncovered, right? We'll be able to see them. And so what you may not see today, in 6 months, 10 months, 15 months, you'll start to see different stuff that you didn't see because of where you've healed to, and now the insights that you have. And so the crazy thing about it, Alan, was that I had my freezer filled with food, and I kept food in it for 5 years. I don't know about you, but I don't want a 5-year-old freezer burned steak. It's not tempting on any level, but it was a security, like a sense of security that I got from just knowing food was in there, not even that it was edible, and so that kind of stuff will reveal itself as we heal and we start looking at, why am I doing this? And so it's not like a one and done. This is a constant lifelong process. It's not a diet, it's a lifestyle. But by doing that, you get to the best version of you rather than just the better version.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's outstanding. And interesting how you were able to finally make that connection, right? And about where that came from. And how many times in our lives do we have connections like that we're just unaware of, and how our behaviors are recurring over and over again and not really knowing where they're stemming from. I think that is a really powerful piece that you just mentioned. So everything that we've talked about today, what is one thing that you would recommend as a takeaway for our listeners to remember?
I think the biggest one is, don't go it alone. Find those guys like we talked about earlier. Find the guys that are a step ahead, that are trustworthy, and start that process of looking for other men that you can come around and have a community. Because it's just like going to the gym. I mean, you're like, hey, I want to hit my personal best. If you're on the bench, how do you hit your personal best? Do you do it alone, or do you have a spotter? Because there's some risk when you're trying to hit your personal best of overloading and then not being able to follow through. So having other men around you that can point out the blind spots, that you're open to having them give you feedback. It's not comfortable. It takes time, but developing those kind of relationships, man, they last a lifetime and it's invaluable. So finding trustworthy men that you're willing to hear what they have to say and then process through it. I would say that's really crucial, because without the men, you're still blind.
Yeah, absolutely. That is perfect way to sum up our talk here today. So I want to thank you, Mike, for spending time with me today. And we were able to unpack some stuff here about some of this past traumas and how we're perpetuating some legacy here in terms of our generational issues. And I really appreciate you doing that. So how would our guests be able to get a hold of you? What's the best way to do that and get in contact with you and get some coaching?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like we talked about, I have a podcast, Living Fearless Today. And so if you go to livingfearlesstodaypodcast.com, you'll be able to, just like you get here with Alan, you can get, a booster shot almost, because it's like, we really need more examples of men that have walked the road that we are and, come out on the other side, because we're inundated with the fact of, no, you're alone, you'll never change. So that's the best place to get a hold of me. If you're on social media, you can find me on most of the platforms as Hi Coach Mike. So just know that you're not alone. And Alan and I have a passion for helping, you as a man to grow. And so I'm grateful to be here, Alan. Thank you for asking me to join you.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you being on the podcast today. And I'll make sure all that information is in the show notes for people to be able to get a hold of Mike and get some work done. So I want to say thank you again, Mike, for being here, and I really appreciated the time.
My pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Revolutionary Man podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the brotherhood that is The Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.